I'm Dr. Jason Beckta, and this is Out of the Basement, a podcast exploring radiation medicine and things that don't generate grant funding or tenure. I'm board certified in radiation oncology and have a PhD in molecular radiobiology. And though I am a doctor, I'm not your doctor, and none of this content should be considered medical advice. All right, so, Matt and I decided that we were just going to do a quick episode on contracts and jobs and machine choices and settings and all that. And of course, it turned into a 2-hour sort of rant. Well, maybe not a rant, but a thoughtful, thought-provoking discussion between the two of us that went late into the night. So this is part 2 of the jobs and contracts and machine buying episode. And we are going to work on being a little bit quicker in the future so I don't have to chop it up into multiple pieces, but we'll see if that happens. So we'll pick up where we left off talking about linear accelerator choices depending on your setting.
I actually don't feel like adaptive is that important to a practice at the moment. And I don't know that it's really a competitive advantage unless you're looking to be like a big GI place, which, again, it's a big hospital network. So if they build out a big GI oncology service line, then yeah, it makes a lot of sense. But like for your practice, do you feel like it would help you capture a lot of new patients?
It's hilarious. I have literally made the exact same argument against getting specifically the Halcyon ethos, where and this is a great point of kind of my complete ignorance about your practices, because it's on the other part of the country, and America's a big place, and even though I say that all the time, I forget it myself. And so there's that type of geography and sort of catchment area and competitive sort of environment, whereas for me, I live in work in kind of upstate New York, it's not rural by like a census definition, but it's not a city. And so there are 3 kind of main hospitals along this stretch of the interstate, that kind of runs through this area. My group staffs all 3, and they're, there's really, we don't compete with ourselves, even though it's now a federation of the medical system, as it always becomes. But, and so there is no competitive advantage, because there's no really like all the patients who are kind of in this area come to me. And if they don't live in this area, they don't come to me. Like it is. So, but what are you looking for in a job?
One thing I decided was important was that the practice has a busy SBRT service. And I said that to Cliff Robinson when I was talking with him about this job and everything, and he sort of nodded as if it was like a good idea. So maybe that gives value to it. But I think it's a marker for a lot of things, right? I think if you have a strong, busy SBRT service, you have to have modern, at least modern good dosimetry, and you have to have active and engaged physics that's on site every day. You don't have to. You can still do SBRT without that. But I wanted that. I wanted a physicist, I wanted to be able to do SBRT every day. And I wanted to hear that they were a practice that was doing a ton of it. Because I think that if you can do SBRT, you can do IMRT and so on and so forth. Right. So that's
totally agree. Cause I think so that is a perfect point, where by the nature of radiation oncology. So in other specialties in medicine, there are quote unquote community residency programs, where you see other environments. For us, for radiation oncology, there is no real, at least that I'm aware of at all, community radiation oncology residency. So we are almost exclusively exposed to academic medical centers and large academic medical centers. And I don't think residents appreciate, just because they can't, that is not a given. Like it's not a given that there will be SBRT or even strong SBRT. And I personally know places that just can't do SBRT, and it's not can't quote unquote at the part of the physician. It's can't based on the staff, and it is usually physics is usually the rate limiting step. And that's not something that you're kind of exposed to as a new grad or a resident, because you just don't know. And I think that is a great, in general, I would strongly agree, where that's a great sort of litmus test for what kind of environment you're getting yourself into, if they can do regular SBRT or not.
There are still practices, maybe not, but I think there are still practices that don't have SBA, that don't do any. Is that
Absolutely. I
okay?
guarantee there. I personally know of more than one.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Well, so I like. I mean, I guess that's true as of like a couple of years ago. I haven't asked them recently, but I had two people that I knew that had a practice that didn't do SBRT.
right. It's
And
not the doctor. It's the. I mean, it is to a degree, but it's the
it's not
physics is
available,
usually, yeah. It's not available. It's either a technology or a staffing issue, and it's never
or
like the
both.
skill or both. Yeah, or and it's
Yeah.
never like the skill of a physician.
Oh, you know what? Yeah, our VA. Our VA is part of our practice. They can't they that is pure equipment, but they send SBRTs to us, like to the main
Yeah,
center, or
and
to
that's
like the yeah.
I think, so in terms of just broad strokes of kind of evaluating job opportunities, there's I feel like the academic jobs are sort of quote unquote talked to death to a degree, just because that's what
Yeah.
everyone knows. And so just on the I would really class your new job as privatemics. That's just the term I would use. But so beyond that, it's usually either community, hospital employed, or my, so my group is kind of the what I consider the dying version of what all of medicine used to be. So it used to be,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
hospitals didn't employ people. Hospitals were buildings that existed, and physician groups provided services on a contract. And that used to be the dominant model. And the most recent stat I saw was actually that 80 something percent of physicians under 40 are now employed by hospital systems, which is a huge change from what it used to be.
Yeah.
So me being in a single specialty, physician owned private practice operating on a professional services contract is kind of outmoded. And actually, at the hospital I chiefly staff, to my knowledge, there's only really, I think it's us and the anesthesiology group does that. I think there's another much smaller one, but out of all these specialties, there's only two or three of us that do this, and everyone else is employed.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. And
And
so that's common.
okay. And
Um,
uh, does that worry you?
It does and it doesn't. So,
It's
and
weird, right? It's
yeah, it's weird because it's really, so hearing you talk about your job and my friends, so I know exactly where, how my group gets paid, where it comes from, and what it literally is just,
yeah.
our agreement is for every patient we treat, the hospital gets the technical side. So every time we bill, when a patient completes a course of breast radiation,
Yeah.
at the end of that, all the fees generated, there's a technical fee and a professional fee. So all the technical revenue reimbursement goes to the hospital system. All the professional reimbursement comes to my group, and then so we get to decide how that gets divvied up and all those things. And so on us, there's several different components to that. So there's like my contract as an associate with my group, but then the bigger question to kind of ask if you're evaluating sort of these practices is what is the group's contract with the hospital? Because it worries me where nothing, and this is kind of what residents also have to realize, is that everything is chaos. So where the AAMC and the ACGME, there are sort of rules and regulations in place to protect resident physicians and medical students. The jobs are just the wild west. So all those
Yeah.
sorts of things, those protections are gone. Nobody owes you anything. There is no protection. Anything can happen at any time.
Yeah.
And so, so one of the things with these professional fee groups is that the hospital or hospitals can decide to they don't want to work with you anymore. And so there's a very prominent group out in the Midwest. And so they just said, that's it. We are not renewing your contract as a group, like nothing with an individual physician, but we're not renewing the group's contract. And I believe some of the physicians were offered employment, but I don't know if enough, if they offered employment to everyone that worked there. And so people had to leave. So the group just dissolved and doesn't exist anymore. And because the hospital decided they didn't want to do that, and so a lot of hospital contracts or group, I think I know of groups that will do 10-year agreements with hospitals. I think that's pretty uncommon. I think it's usually 5 to 7 years is the common
Yeah.
one. So if you find yourself evaluating one of these practices, then that's something to consider. That being said, I don't know how many there are left. So the big ones like Cerro down in that's obviously always the go-to. I think they're a mix, so they're huge.
Well, so I think what's interesting. I love this is like such a fascinating topic to me, mostly because of the interests at play and like how people how people speak about all the different situations. But I think just to make it practical for people, Is it correct to say that, so like, just to kind of, I guess, make it like, so people, kind of know what we're talking about, that like someone has to buy the machine. That's what's unique about our field, right? You can't work without
Yes.
a machine. So someone buys the machine. It can either be the hospital, or it can be a group of physicians that get together and buy it. Or a weird Frankenstein contract that's a mix of the two, right? Like that
Right.
happens as
Yeah.
well. So the technical part of the pay for a course of treatment is about 70%, right? That's what I was always told.
Yeah, in general, and these numbers you can easily, quote unquote, easily. It usually does break that down. You can look at it specifically, but yeah, it's usually 70
It's like
30.
2/3, right? Okay, so and that goes to who owns the machine. It's like the machine gets paid. That's the way that I think about it.
I like
Um,
that. Yeah.
yeah, and then the professional fees, or the pro fees, is the difference, and that goes to the physician service, and that can either be like you, or it could be like your group, but it's the physician service. um and so, the way I think about it is like, if you come at everything from that baseline, you kind of have a good idea of like whose interests are at play and what you should think and worry about. So what's fascinating to me is like what you described. So your practice is like the old way, right? Or you
It's
you
it's
guys
one of
you
the old the old way is not being employed. So there's two old ways of exactly what you described,
Yes.
of either owning the machines or you don't. But either way, you are providing your services on a contract to a hospital. You are not a W-2 employee of the
Right.
hospital.
And my sense is the ones where you own the machines and you're providing services are like even more rare than your job these days. Is that correct? Or
Correct. And there's actually
okay.
never, so there's never a group that is only getting, well, I shouldn't say that, but in general, you're not going to find a practice where you only get the technical, like that doesn't, because you're the doctor.
Right,
So
you have to get right. I mean, you have to get
yeah,
paid for your service. So right. So
right.
you either get both or you get just pro fees.
Correct.
And it sounds like most practices like yours these days do not own the machine, so they just get the pro fee, and they have some agreement with the owner of the machine, whether it's a hospital or whatever.
Yep.
So in that situation, I understand why people really like it, because you have a lot of power, because you have really good control over like the professional services, which they absolutely need. It's not like anybody can run the machine, but any radiation oncologist can run the machine. So as you just said, at the end of your contract, they can just cancel and hire radiation oncologists and have them run it, right?
Right. Right.
And my sense is like a lot of places are doing that.
Well, so
You know?
and to make people less paranoid, it's the what is fortunately kind of uncommon to my knowledge is what I described about the hospital deciding we're over and done with, but the group wanting to continue. That to my knowledge is pretty uncommon. What is much more common is, especially kind of given the age bracket of the certain generation, is that people are getting to retirement age that have done this old model, and instead of handing the reins off to the next generation, they are selling to either an academic medical center or a VC.
Yeah.
Then the next people who are working at that site are employed, because that opportunity has gone away. Now, the other part of this, which is a whole other episode, is the fact that linear accelerators, you can't, even if you had several $1,000,000 laying around, you can't just buy and install one. So they are regulated by the state government. So most states have what's called a certificate of need. So I can't just go buy a linear accelerator, plunk it down next to an existing hospital, and just go. I can't do that. I need to go to the state government and say, hat in hand, and ask permission to buy, install, and operate a linear accelerator. Now, some states, even if they have it, they don't really enforce it, or it's not that big of a deal. Whereas in other states, it's incredibly difficult and a large process. But that's why it's so dangerous. It's great. Usually the best trade is also the worst trade. It's always a double-edged sword. So that freedom is wonderful, but a hospital at the end of a 5-year contract can say, we're done with you. And now another, if you were a different type of physician, you could theoretically buy the building next door and compete directly. But for us, literally the government will often, stop you. And if that doesn't,
Yeah.
the several $1,000,000 needed to buy one does. But
Yeah. So I think, but what's funny is I think when people who are in positions like yours talk about being an employed physician, there's this sorry, let me go the other way. So when people like me who are an employed physician like think about jobs like yours, that's actually the fear and the risk I would worry about, right? Is
Mm.
that, like, even if my group is amazing and I love my colleagues and my partners are great, like, you're kind of at the mercy of the owner of the machine, and they can sort of, quote, fire you if they wanted to, or you could fail to come to an agreement. They can drive down, the value of the agreement for you. There's leverage there against you. But I know that a lot of my friends that are in your kind of position, they look at employed physicians, and you kind of mentioned it in passing, but then you're subject to all the gamification that they do and all this stuff where they control your targets. And so for me, it's like, I think it's really important as a job seeker to, like, people can screw you with every type of job, right? So I feel like
Yes, they
it's
can.
important to, like, know how it all works, and then like get to know the people that make those decisions, and like make sure you're like in line with their values. And what was shocking to me is when I had this discussion with the residents about the jobs, like the people who were hired already, it's Washington, so like they're hired early, and like the people who were hired already, like they didn't even know how their job worked, like in that
Yep.
sense. And that was like kind of crazy. And you can think of cynical reasons that is, but the reality is I think we should be teaching this stuff, because the people who, you know, I wish just doctors ran everything, as I do think it would be better, even though there are like some bad doctors, but there are people who are like very skilled in business and negotiations and contracts. And if you just don't even know what you're signing up for, I just feel like you can get screwed by someone who just takes advantage of you.
Oh, easy. I mean, and that's the thing is, and we forget this because we're so laser focused, and it's being a physician in America in 2022 is very interesting, because to get to this point, kind of like the conversation we had the other night about board certification, you have to hit so many milestones, you have to jump through so many hoops, you have to, and as we all know, the crucible of medical education really kind of breeds and sort of fosters a personality where you have to hit this mix of subservience, but type A aggressiveness, and it really just kind of creates this sort of person who is very good at focusing and doing a particular thing, but and especially in RadOnc, you see this a lot. The saying, "The nail that sticks out gets hammered down." Like there's a concern and a worry about rocking the boat and kind of looking into these things, and then also there's the bigger zeitgeist and culture of America where money and medicine are bad, and so the physician, you're made to feel guilty for even thinking about these things, and that you're being unethical or whatever for even thinking about it. And then it allows all these MBA C-suite people who just their sole training, existence, and experience is to only think about and do these things, and it really just creates this perfect environment of control. Where and not and I do want to be very clear. I don't think any of this is really malicious. There's obviously malicious people out there, but this is just kind of the system that was born. I don't think there's some Illuminati kind of puppet master pulling the strings, but I think that this is just kind of what has happened in terms of how everything has evolved together. And I really do get the impression that there's a large level of guilt for people if they think about this and look into this, and this finger wagging that this is bad, because honestly it's just because of the academic environments where at the purest level the academic mission is to only try to advance knowledge and science and not care about money. Now with the academic medical center model, that has changed, but you're kind of indoctrinated at the medical student level by those quote unquote evil, greedy private practice doctors, and that is carried on, and just there's no real drive or incentive to change it. But I think understanding those sorts of things and this, so what is an RVU, what is a CPT, how do you generate money in those, and that is my experience as well of and for me, like, this is obviously a hobby of mine, but it took a lot of personal effort, like literally years of looking at these things, and I still would say maybe I understand 4% of it, and that was me giving a lot of personal effort, and it's very easy to just really not have any understanding of this.
Yeah, and what's funny is, like, I can imagine a lot of people, like, trainees might listen to what you just said and still not even really totally get it, because the reality is like the dollar amount is not important at all. Right. So like I do notice that people talk about salary, and that's fine. I mean, like I actually am in the camp that thinks we should just be open about it, because it doesn't help anyone to have it be secret.
I agree. Yeah.
Well, it doesn't help any worker to have it be
It doesn't
secret.
help us. Yeah, it
Right,
doesn't help any
exactly.
doctor. Yeah.
But I think that but what we're talking about though is that people respond to incentives in obvious ways, right? So it's really important to just understand the relationships between all of the parties, and who owns what, and who's providing services, and how that's paid. Again, just because it's like people do what you expect them to. This isn't, none of it is like a secret. Like, if people are incentivized to do something financially, they're going to do it. So I think it's like that greedy private practice thing that people say, it comes from, the rare situation of a practice that might even own the machine and do, questionable treatments because it makes a lot of money. and
Right.
and like, if any situation where people make a lot of money, or can, like, some types of people are going to respond to that. So I think that, or I would say it's actually hard for all types of people not to respond to that, right? So I think that's the key, is kind of when you're searching, just understanding the setup, and then being able to think about who's making the decisions, and what they're like. And it's hard to do in a short interview. In a way, it's why I like being an employed physician, right? Because you come to work, and you get a salary, and there's an agreement, and you go home, and you don't have to worry about any of the other stuff. And I realize there's a lot of room to abuse that from an employer position. So you could just work for a crappy group that has weird targets and makes you miserable. But if you find a really good one with good culture, it's like a pretty sweet gig, in my opinion. But I totally respect that people like other models and respond to that kind of stuff. And I think that's like really, it's kind of a cool thing about radiation oncology.
Yeah, I think, and that's kind of the really the intent of kind of having this out there as like a recording for people to kind of think about,
Yeah.
because everyone talks about salary and 401ks and dental and health and blah blah blah, but I think the core of any job is kind of how you as the individual physician are getting paid, and really, and that as it relates to, for us, of targets and how that is measured. So if somebody doesn't understand what an RVU is, or how it's generated, I think that's kind of where everything starts. So because really the other part that I've seen from hospital employed physicians or positions is these mythical unicorn things that I've seen pop up on SDN, or even get like mailers about, but these middle of nowhere practices that are offering insanely high salaries for like 5 on beam, like seeing no patients. And these are, I see it's almost like our version of iBanking, where you hear like med students like, oh, I'm going to quit and going to go to investment banking. Like, for RadOnc, the refrain is, well, if I can't find a job, I'm just going to go get one of those, middle of nowhere jobs and make bank. And so those jobs, they still exist, and everyone's definition of quote unquote making bank is very different. But I think if you find yourself kind of interviewing at hospital positions now, so this is different. So like as a kind of like what Matt's job is, of an employed hospital physician, the things to kind of pay attention to are, what are your targets? So, is there your base salary with a bonus? Like, do you have to hit a certain level to get your base salary? What is that? How is it calculated? And so if your base salary is only quote unquote guaranteed if you hit, 7,000 RVUs or 8,000 RVUs or whatever, that's something to really pay attention to. But I think a much more common one is, it's not really a bait and switch per se. It sort of is, but that the first 2 or 3 years you have a guaranteed base, and then you switch to production, meaning that after the first 2 or 3 years, your salary is dependent on how much you work. And if you go to a middle of a nowhere place for a very high dollar amount salary that's guaranteed only for 2 years, and so during that time, there's really there's a town of 1,000 people or whatever, and your target RVUs is 10,000. So 10,000 is something that Matt can easily do, or I can easily do in like an established place with a good infrastructure. But if you're in a somewhat rural location and you don't really have a good referral stream, and you're only being able to see 1 to 4 patients a week, 1 to 4 consults a week, and that translates now in these days to maybe 5 to 10 on beam, you're not going to hit 10,000 RVUs.
Yeah.
and so I personally know, where this has happened, where people don't know this, people don't pay attention to this, and you can drop 50-60% of your salary just because you are not hitting those targets. And I see this incentivized all the time. So it's those hospital employed physicians where, and usually it's like very excited, enthusiastic HR people who will kind of tell you like, oh, it's X amount. What they don't tell you kind of in the opening spiel is the terms of the contract or the length of the contract. And then like at the end of that, what happens? So is it like automatically renewed? Is it renegotiated? Does it switch to a production based thing? And so I think that the question of really for when you hear that number, and especially for empty pocket residents, hearing these numbers they're big numbers, asking, well, okay, how is that number derived? Is that a permanent number? And then if it's an RVU based number, how many patients are on beam? Is this an existing practice? Or like, is that a reasonable thing to hit? So
yeah, what's actually tough, this would be a good thing to talk about, is like, so we talked about, the culture of the practice, like your own practice, but I did ask about that too, was your expectation for referrals and growth, right? Which is a version of what you just said. If it's presented to you as part of a contract, or just like you can talk about it with your boss or whatever, and where that comes from. So when you were like job searching, did you think to ask about, like how busy are the medical oncologists? How many are there? What kind of diseases are you treating? What's your case mix? Did you ask those kind of things when you were?
So it's funny because again, on the job one, with how my job search went, I didn't get the chance to ask that too much. So
you were like, hey, yeah, listen up, folks.
Yeah, listen up, guys. With my yeah. So I wish I had gotten asked that more. So for me, like, my current practice, that was kind of offered up to me. I really only cared about, so I mentally shortcut that where I would
cared about getting a job.
I cared about getting a job, but in these scenarios, the easier way, because like what you asked is incredibly nuanced, and so it's hard to even get a straight answer. Like the people you're asking that, even physicians might not know. So it's really how many linear accelerators are kind of there. So like for me, for my hospital, it's 2 linear accelerators, but 1 versus 2 versus 3. How long has that center been there? What has kind of been an average number on beam? What is the mix? And like, where is that coming from? So yeah, exactly. How many med oncs do you employ is an easy way to kind of get at that.
Oh, you could even ask like when they bought their last one and when they're planning to get their next one.
Yeah.
That's a nice, if they're buying another Linux soon, that's a good sign, in my opinion, for growth.
I totally agree. And so for
most
me,
of the time.
Most of the time.
Yeah.
And like what I liked about my practice was the fact that it was really busy, because as Todd tweets about all the time, and these numbers aren't great in terms of how our specialty is built, regardless of the elasticity we're seeing right now, but the raw numbers aren't great. So for me, an important part was sort of future proofing myself, where I don't love being this busy right now, where I am well above the 90th percentile for RVU productions, but for me, I'm thinking about like, okay, if I stay here forever and everything kind of continues on with hypofrac and SBRT and cut reimbursements, I'd rather be at the bow of a sinking ship. And so if I'm this busy now and I can protect that, that's so it's cynical.
You're in Todd's Pareto tail.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And so I'm on that end, and that was, I knew that it was, it was a choice, sort of, in that it was my only job offer, but, it was a choice in that, that was exactly what I was looking for was, I always think of it as the being at the bow of the sinking
fascinating.
ship.
That's fascinating. Maybe I'm too optimistic of a person.
Or maybe I'm too pessimistic, as my wife has told me sometimes, but it's really, because it really comes down to that. Now, APM is such a touchy subject, and what bundled payments are and stuff. But as the structure of our specialty right now, and I've seen these own numbers internally too. As I was saying before, my number of new starts, or my hospital's number of new starts, is up 10 to 15% over the past 5 years, but we are consistently below our on beam average. Just because of hypofrac. And then, of those things, reimbursement is down from 10 years ago, or, is cut, and the math just doesn't add up like continually. So if your salary of X amount is being supported by 10 on beam, while that might work right now in 2022, is that going to work in 2032? I am very
Yeah.
skeptical.
No, that's totally fair. I think, yeah.
I want to be wrong, to be very clear. I want to be
No,
wrong.
what's funny is my I guess, we haven't gotten to know each other well enough where we know kind of family dynamics, but my wife and I don't think we've ever thought 10 years ahead about anything.
That
It's
doesn't surprise me about you.
I have a retirement fund, so I do think, I'm doing the stuff I'm supposed to do, but I'm more of an in the moment type of
Well, you're
person, I
you'll
guess.
start hung up on that poor baby from your step 3 exam.
That's
That
right. That's
it's
right.
and
No,
that's
but
yeah, I
the
agree.
other thing I was going to say though is for people this year, that's crazy. Is so I did look at this nuanced stuff, and I agree. I think we're in a bubble year, so I think there will be some residents that will get, that will be able to like really look and find what they want. And so the medical oncologist job market is like crazy,
It's on
right?
fire. It's crazy.
Yeah. So my practice, like, I mean, you would guess a very large system that, in my opinion, I'm biased, obviously, but has a good culture in a very desirable city. They're working hard to get medical oncologists.
Yep.
And it's like, I think it's just because they have a really good market. And I think that's important. So these kinds of things happen. And so I just asked, like, like, if I can't grow really fast, is that going to be okay? And they were like, yes, we understand the struggles. And so, you have to take that with, it's just their word. I mean, we'll see what happens, I guess. But I actually asked that because when I talked to the medical oncologist during my interview, she said that, and she was very happy, but just said they've been like, interviewing and like trying to get someone. And she said that it, might be hard to really grow quickly while during that problem. And so I think just being open about that is important. Again, it's so hard because I had a job. Like, it's so nice to interview when you have a job. When you have a
Oh yeah,
job,
I totally agree.
it's
Yeah.
like, yeah. So I actually, when I went, I almost, I like kind of told them, I felt like I was almost interviewing them because I asked so many questions about things, but everyone was so nice. And like, when I think that those are interesting things to ask because it gives you a real sense of like what it's going to be like. And I think that there will be challenges of some aspects no matter what. So just knowing about those up front and understanding the consequences of those challenges is like a luxury, So if people can achieve that, I think that's like a really nice way to kind of go deep on a practice and try to learn more about it.
And I think, you were talking about when you got your new job here, there's some things that you just unfortunately can't know about yourself or about this
Right.
until you do it. And so your perspective coming out of this as a, a several year into being a practicing attending, and the things that you value and the things that you know about are going to be different than me or the next person. And there's no way to kind of succinctly communicate that. And the one thing I do, I think people kind of regret their choices sometimes about where they went, and because maybe if they had asked this, that, or the other thing, they could have prevented it. But you can't know that. You can't do that. So you could do everything perfectly, ask every perfect question, and something about it you just might not know. So I think
Yeah.
trying to search for that
Yeah.
unicorn job is tough. But I do, yeah, it's interesting. I do strongly believe, I think we're in a bubble year. I think I think we're kind of in a bubble era to it. I don't know how long. I don't think it's just this year, because the things I'm observing are twofold. Where one, COVID burnout, where people
Yeah.
are not necessarily retiring, but maybe stepping back from clinical roles, and in this kind of black box academic medical center environment, which means very different than it did 50 years ago. But people can do that, where you can still quote unquote be full time, but step back from clinical. Somebody's still got to take care of those patients, so that creates a job. The quality of that job might be debatable, but that's a job that wasn't there before. And then two, exactly that of practices selling out to academic medical centers and chopping up what used to be kind of a single one or two private practice doctors making X amount of money into 4 or 5 satellite academic docs making much less, but still having a job. And so I think, I don't know how long that can go on for, again, giving the competing factors of hypofrac and lung cancer screening and cut reimbursements. But I think it's hard to future proof yourself. And again, that's exactly what I did, where I knew this practice was incredibly busy. This job I took was incredibly busy. And that was my shot at future proofing myself, even knowing that that's not something that you can really do.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, those are all, and I agree. Like even the medical oncologists are very interesting.
But
Their market is insane.
so to ask you though, so was yours was busy, and what you kind of mean by that is there was already a very strong referral base. So like when you started, you essentially had to do nothing to like find new sources of referrals. Is that correct?
Correct.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what's in so that's like a really nice aspect to think about at a high level, because that's a big upside of academic jobs. I kind of was always told that, where like it's funny, like my view of private practice was like, oh, you have to like go out and like take people to dinner to get them to go to send people to you. That still happens, but like again, like I'm in a private institution now, and I'm not gonna have to do that at all because it's a big network and it's all built in, right? I mean, I have to meet the people, but
Yeah.
like they work for the same company. So like I think it's interesting, it's important to ask about that, because I think it's a skill that you need to do, and if you are expected to go out and find new sources of referrals in your community, I actually think that would be fun. I would enjoy that, but not everyone would. So it's an important thing to
It's
think
a
about.
very, but
Yeah,
yeah, and that's, we'll have Sam will talk about that at some point, because
it's
so
linked to being busy, right? That's kind of why. Yeah,
it
sorry to.
is, and no, because that's I don't know. I think that's another thing of the quote unquote old days that is dying because
Yeah,
of just the way things are being conglomerated. So
tumor
the
boards, right? Too like.
tumor boards are big.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and that's, so then it gets into what another thing you had said about when a referral is placed to radiation oncology. Does it just go to the department and it's divvied up evenly, or does it go to specific people? These are all like kind of really nuanced
Oh
things,
man,
but
dude,
yeah.
that question.
That's a lot. I don't even know if I'd ask. That's a third rail sort of question.
I would not at that. That's one that, like, you know what that question is? That's a question for like whatever the analogy of like the resident interview dinner is.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Like
No,
if you
that's a
can find
question
a
for like you
person.
or me, like
Yeah,
already with a job, just kind of interviewing them. That, yeah.
yeah, like I guess I mean I'm going to be gone, so I won't be that helpful. But yes, if you were someone who's interviewing at WashU in the next month, you could ask me about that, and I will tell you, because that is a huge thing. I have some friends that have had like horror stories with related to distribution of patients within the practice.
Yeah, that's like a whole other long
It's like
conversation,
another
because
show,
that's,
right?
yeah. And so that's what's, for me, it's nice to just kind of plug and play where I show up and I have a built-in referral stream. I do think that that's much more common, even private practice, it doesn't matter as much if you are kind of in a system that employs people. Now, the what I like to consider the Wild West of radiation oncology is down in Florida, where this practice is kind of alive and well. And so Florida, that kind of wine and dine networking thing is still very much there. And I know, personally know stories about people who had to do exactly what you were talking about, of just take people out to dinner and do the golf course thing and compete with these, supermodel sales reps and all these sorts of things. And it is a skill. Some people do flourish at that. It's interesting. Radiation oncology doesn't generally kind of attract people who are either enjoy that or are good at it. That's not kind of our thing. So it's hard, but yeah, that's
What
definitely.
could you imagine being a person that took a job, um in like in 2019, I guess, right? And
Yep.
then COVID hit. Like
I cannot.
if you have to like your thing is to take people out to dinner and like restaurants just close.
I think about that a lot. Like, I don't know. And so a lot of my personal network, my friends got jobs in places that had kind of built in, like most of them took like academic jobs or in big private places.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, really in terms of the stories I personally know in recent, in quote unquote modern times, it's usually down in Florida, and going back to the certificate of need. The reason that is that Florida is much looser with those things to a degree. So it is easier to kind of get your own LINAC and do that. Whereas, here in upstate New York, it's harder. It's definitely doable compared to some other states, but it's much harder to do that. So you don't get that kind of environment.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's so. I mean, I actually, like I said, I mean, I like community building and stuff, so I would enjoy that. But I think you have to, like, you got to know about it, right? Because it's important, and I think you're right that probably there's a fair portion of radiation oncologists that are not like super comfortable doing that.
And that's yeah, because so for me, and I know several of our kind of friend group to a degree is we're actively doing that with the arthritis things, and so
So cool. It's so
yeah,
cool.
and
I got it.
that's
Yeah.
you got it. Well, you can, you know, all the future can be yours, and so we all have kind of done that, and that's you know, something that we get to engage in to practice build, and I mean, I cheat and I just ask follow up patients, but you know that
I just feel like treating pain is so rewarding. So that's
Oh,
why.
it's incredible. Well, and
Yeah.
it's funny,
Yeah.
you know, because I know the paper just came out recently, and some, but like I had a follow up, a knee patient came in and follow up on Wednesday, and she had complete pain relief. It's even hard for me to like this. Not really getting off topic, but to witness it in real life, and you like write it down, and then to talk to somebody who's like, oh yeah, it's completely gone. I don't know. Maybe it's all voodoo
Yeah.
magic. It just, but I saw it with my own. I did it. Saw it with my own eyes. I don't know, but
The
but
data's there. Data's there, you know?
the
Yeah.
data's there, and then but it just
Yeah.
sounds so fantastic, and then
Yeah.
you know, now it's a
Yeah.
weird thing. So but it's those are I think really for any job of any environment, the question is basically how do you get paid, and kind of work out from there, because as crass as that is, and as kind of as much as we've been taught to avoid that, if you can find out and kind of understand the mechanism by which you are getting paid, I think all those questions are answered. So if it's an RVU based or that, and kind of this, that's the center spoke.
Yeah.
And like I just do it totally. Your thing about the residents who just signed who don't know, I think that's incredibly common. I think
But
people just are happy to get jobs.
mechanism being the key word, right? Again, it's
Yeah.
like it's not like I would gladly take a little less number for a
Yes.
much better mechanism because
Mechanism.
that,
Yeah. So mechanism of getting paid. That's the key.
yeah.
Not the dollar amount. Not the shiny numbers. It's mechanism of getting paid.
Yeah, because
Understand that.
that's gonna like that's the kind of that's the thing that like affects like your mental health, right? I mean,
Yep.
that's the thing that you will worry about and think about. Not so much, but like it's, you know, I mean, no, I mean nobody else takes a job without knowing how they get paid. It's like really
Right.
weird to not think about it. Anyway, so yeah, yeah,
No, and that's, we'll have a whole kind of other thing on like CPTs and RVUs and all that, because it is a whole. And again, I really enjoy it, and it's a weird sentence to have, but and even I feel like I barely understand it, because it's just so intentionally Byzantine to the way it's built, and why we use it is just sort of wild. But
did you think about, do you have other topics, or can I propose one?
no, please propose one. Yeah.
Did you think about like CME funds or money at all?
Very interesting that you asked that specific question. So I did not, in my group. So
Do you
the
have
nature of,
any?
not officially, but
Okay.
it is kind of because my group is 5 people. I'm the only associate, so it's 4 partners and me. So when you're in a single specialty physician owned, it is me sending an email to one of the partners or walking to an office being like, hey, can you reimburse me for this? And then we have a conversation about it. So that's not
Okay.
common, I don't feel,
Okay.
but
So, I, it's funny. It's something that I like sort of paid attention to more coming out of residency. Uh, you know, again, it's a biased thing because I was applying for academics, but I feel like it's a little less important. But I also feel like you can't like ignore it completely, right? Because I think even if you're a community doctor, you still do some stuff CME, and I do think it's worthwhile to like try to engage a little bit with like a society, you know, that kind of a thing.
it's
Um,
yeah. And then but the problem with, because I agree, but the problem with that is residents don't really understand what that means. At least I would say. I don't know, maybe you disagree
yeah.
with me on that, but
No, I mean, do you mean like because they view it like going to conferences and buying books?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that, because that's all, you know, one, like CME is not a resident thing. Like no resident has to engage in CME. It's kind of this nebulous term. And yeah, we
Right.
usually mean it is yeah, basically, do you get to go to Astro? How much of it is covered? And yeah, do you have anything left over to buy some books? And so for what a resident evaluating a job is very different than kind of how like more established people think about CME.
Yeah. Like, so does your interesting. So does your practice care about going to Astro at all?
No, so if yeah, to kind of expand on the definition, they do pay for my Astro dues, which are expensive when you're not a resident anymore. So like
Yeah.
that stuff is encouraged and paid for. And then we don't, you know, I hadn't really thought about that. Yeah, because it's no one in my practice is really interested in doing that. So I don't know if it's really been pushed, to be honest.
Okay, it's interesting. Well, I guess I just wonder because I feel like to some extent it's a very common place to recruit, right? So
Yeah,
like every practice maybe thinks a little. I don't know. I mean, maybe there are practices that don't care at all, but I can
That's my
imagine.
practice. So it's very interesting. So my
Yeah,
practice is kind of and it's weird because I do feel like a unicorn. Well, so I don't know how common my practice's attitudes are, just because nobody kind of knows or talks about it outside of the academic environment. But yeah, it's not like actively discouraged at all, but it's not something that my partners focus on, because the people I work with are much more interested with having an identity outside of radiation oncology. So while
yeah.
we truck RVUs, like we are very busy, one of my partners just would just, he thinks about frisbee golf just 24/7, and that's so that frisbee golf comes up more than astro.
Yeah, no, so I think like that's why I think it's really, real. This is exactly what I'm talking about. I think it's really important to get, like, just to go back to what we were saying before, like to get a sense of that, because you probably agree with me that like there's this like kind of bias, maybe slight, maybe more less than slight in some places, that practices like that are like not as good or whatever compared to like an
Yeah.
academic place. But I'd much rather have people think about it like, again, maybe this is true for other specialties, but I feel like in a way we're lucky that there is a variability there. So like I do feel like all different types of people can get really good jobs, if they're available. But you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
that I think that that's really important, and that's why I'd have like CME like below it, unless you feel like you want to be active in an organization and things like that. I did ask about that, and it was funny because their answer to me was like, it's too low right now, implying that there's going to be some like, talking in the future about
And I know I've said this to you a couple times recently, where it's interesting how quickly that kind of fades. So for me, you're now that we're talking about it, I do kind of remember that implication about, oh well, if a place doesn't care about this as much, then it's weaker in X, Y, or Z. And so part of the draw for my practice was actually the opposite, where and maybe I'll get canceled for this. There is kind of a dog and pony show to it, where and actually there's a big a Twitter thread recently about people bragging about how many publications they had. I think it was a neurosurgeon talking
I
about
saw
this.
that, dude. That got retweeted like a ton.
Yeah, so that's what so I strongly agree with that. So
Yeah.
if somebody tells me that they have 300 publications, I would not let a family member go see them, because to me, and obviously that's a very broad stroke and a very aggressive thing to say, but if you're putting your energy there, then you're not putting your energy into the clinic. And so
I saw someone said that, right? Some RadOnc.
that's there's yeah, maybe it was me. We'll have to go check my tweets, but
no, I think it was someone else. I was like, damn, that's, yeah. I mean, it's hard to argue with that. It's
well, because
an uncomfortable thing to say.
It's an uncomfortable thing to say, and I say this as someone who has like several dozen publications now at this point. But in my general experience, our time is limited. There are 24 hours a day. We are only humans, even if you don't sleep. So if you do something a lot, something's got to give on another end. So if you have a ton of grants and a ton of publications, I don't think that you have the time, just because of the limitation of the linear nature of time, to focus so much in clinic. Versus so what I liked about my practice was, we are, all above the 90th percentile on RVUs, and our entire existence is focused on treating patients and patient care and that thing. And so there's no pressure to publish, there's no pressure to get grants. It's only about being the best doctor you can be. And obviously I'm idealizing it, but there are plenty of places like that. And so in that, it's funny because in academia, that's not being a good clinician is not a benchmark easily. It's papers, publications, those sorts of things. And I don't know what your experience was, but some of the best attendings I had, some of the best teachers I had, were some of the least published.
No, totally agree. And I think what's really funny is, so I want to make one comment so I don't forget as I deviate here.
Yeah.
I feel like it's easier than ever to be what you're talking about, like what your job is, that you are just the best clinician you can be, but you still get to engage in a stimulating way with colleagues in learning, right? Like what, I guess maybe that's not the best. I'm trying to think of like the most like basic general.
No, it's the internet has shortcut everything. We can,
yes.
the internet.
Yeah. And so, and I agree with you. And and it's funny in hindsight, it's like the attendings that you like idolize were the ones that carried like, 5 patients and published and did all that stuff. I'm actually one of those people now. I carry a pretty light. I mean, so now is a weird example because of the
Yeah,
thing.
now is very nebulous for you, I feel like.
Well, and I also like there's been, staffing changes and I'm more of a generalist, and some of that was intentional because I knew this was coming and, things like that. But I would say maybe 9 months ago, I came to a point where I was very busy academically. I was being a medical director. I had a grant, had like multiple clinical trials going, and writing and trying to do translational research, which we should do a show about my
Oh wow,
follies.
yeah, yeah.
I'm not a translation. It was a disaster. Anyway, doing all of that, and I learned sort of the hard way because of my year 2 that you cannot do both. Like you cannot be a 20, 25, 30 on beam clinician and do all that other stuff well. Something suffers, one side or the other. So I was very happy being a 7 to 12, maybe 15 at times, physician, and then doing all the other stuff as well. And I guess I would just add that my case mix was complicated. It was sick thorax, and sarcoma is just like sarcoma is just really tough.
Yeah.
So maybe that added to it as well. If you're treating breast and prostate, maybe that's a little different. But I felt like that was something that I was. And in residency, I would think that my job now was like the best cool thing, and the heavy clinician no publishing was like worse.
Yep.
And I'm actually the opposite now, because it's like what you like to do. Here's my cancel comment: publishing has just become so miserable. I can't stand it.
Oh yeah, I think that's main. I hope that's mainstream. If that's not mainstream, then
and it almost feels like people are just chasing numbers now, and it's like I don't know, man. It's like what I really love is like sitting with patients, and like more and more, it's like all I want to do.
I 4,000% agree, and that's what I wanted because, and I think we've talked about this over several episodes of various topics where it's again, humans respond to incentive right now to get promoted in traditional academic power structures. It's grants, publications. It's these measurable, easy metrics or easy to measure metrics that have become increasingly meaningless. And it's like the score creep of the USMLE Step 1, where a 230 in 2001 is very different than a 230 and right before the score disappeared. So, it went to pass fail. And so, that was, but when you're a resident, the people who are idolized, the people who are promoted, the people who are quote unquote, KOLs and thought leaders, those are the ones that have 3, 4, 500 publications. And, some of them haven't seen a patient in 10 years. And that's a type of physician that you can choose to be, but it's not for everyone. And for me, I got into medicine to take care of patients. And I like the science aspect of it. And I really, it's funny because on the surface, this is very hard to tease out. And when they sell you the MD PhD dream and stuff, it's not very easy to know until you live it. And then, seeing how the sausage is made it's kind of different than the mission. But I think you and I both, I feel like you retweeted the thing about the rise of the academic medical center earlier in the year.
Well, I've done that like 5 times. I love that thread.
I love it so much because that describes my perception and experience to a T, where I've been trying to figure out where the disconnect was from what I was told and from how it used to be, what it is now, and why it seemed to change so rapidly. And I think that thread really encapsulates it. And so I think, for evaluating jobs, that's a big one, where the joke I always saw was, you get protected research time and it's from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Friday. And at least on the academic side, where if you have measurable metrics in terms of grants and papers and stuff, on top of like huge RVU demands, and you're not given a gamma knife service, that's you really got to want that life, because that's a hard life to live.
Yeah, no, we got to do the show. We have to do this like MD PhD academic, like what that means show.
Yeah, because I strongly agree.
Because I think it's I think it's a fascinating topic. And what's really interesting to me is it's sort of like everyone seems to know what's going on with the academic medical centers in terms of their like they're like sort of creep towards being like revenue generating departments, right?
Yeah.
And um and we kind of all know that, but I feel like I don't see very many people just like why don't departments just be intentional about that, right? And have like
I
a
think it's been insidious. Honestly, I think it's a frog in a slow boiled pot. Like, because
it,
until that thread really hung a lantern on it for me, that when I honestly think it was you who retweeted it the first time I saw it. I hadn't really put it together as succinctly as that until I saw it, where it really clicked that it was this taking over of community places, still ostensibly with the culture and the old guard. So the people who were have been around since the 70s, 80s, 90s, who lived that old system, who and kind of that culture is still there, but the structure of it. Because what I have observed a lot is in these academic environments, the senior people who are in leadership positions, who are generally in their 60s, who kind of were attendings in the 90s, they live and still live sort of in the old world of kind of focus on certain things and kind of the idealized version. The younger people, all of my friends, like our generation, so we're all in kind of you and me are in a 5 year window, look back and look forward. Everyone is worked like a dog. Like junior attendings just are supposed to be RVU machines, but still have this sort of academic mindset of, you got to publish this, and if you're not doing it, then you're not really pushing the mission, and thinking about money is bad because you're here for the mission. But at the same time, the system cares about RVUs.
yeah, no.
Um,
And what's crazy is like, I'm sure you listened to the Ralph episode.
oh yes, yeah,
Yeah, so I think he like says it in passing. We weren't talking about it specifically, but he talked about how these net like the universities will like buy these practices and then like dump them on the chair. Like,
yes,
I
oh
mean,
yeah, yeah.
I'm kind of wording it a little crudely,
No, I
right?
think that's
But
pretty much exactly what he said there.
it,
Yeah.
right. So it's what's fascinating is like, we should be intentional in saying that this is not a radiation oncology leadership like thing that's happening, right? This is like way bigger than that. And you're exactly right that I think what happens is these departments that they get bigger and bigger, and then there's expectations from the cancer center on the department of leadership to produce a certain amount of clinical revenue, and then they have to figure out how to make that happen. And what they're faced with is a group of physicians who are successful academically and have been there a very long time and are tied up doing a ton of administrative and research stuff and teaching and things, and they can't take on a huge number of RVUs. And then so what happens is what you described, where juniors get very busy, right? So that's kind of like,
That's
but
almost universally what I've personally observed right now.
yeah, I think, to be fair, there are some centers, and I guess this is a compliment, so we should name them. Like, my sense is Cleveland Clinic is, like, really good.
Yeah.
Maybe they just advertise well. I don't know, but I think there are some academic networks that are much more fair like that, where there's more balance among the faculty in terms of how many patients they're carrying. But so there are some out there, but I would agree with you that like most are imbalanced, right? Where there's
And I do think I do want to be clear too that I don't think this is just a RadOnc thing at all. I think this is an everyone thing.
It could be, yeah. I'd
Um,
be fascinated to like hear from other fields about how that is. You know what? I can actually confirm that, at least in the surgeons that I work with, I see that too.
Yeah, and that's because that's how medicine has moved. So when
Yeah.
we always like to talk about this as a because this is what we are. We're radiation oncologists. But when the system is created, when a federation of a republic of hospitals are kind of put together under an academic umbrella, then incentives change, things change, and it really kind of started. I would argue one of the Sentinel events. Obviously, I'm East Coast, so this is all I think about. But like one of the Sentinel events was kind of like when with Penn and how how Penn sort of became what it is to University of Pennsylvania, become sort of the network it is today when it was faced pressure from outside sort of institutions or privatized healthcare. And so I would say the transformation has really kind of been going on for about 30 years now, maybe, and people probably know a lot better than me about that. But I don't know how to again, it goes back to future proofing yourself for jobs where I don't know how much a new res or a new grad can understand this or control about it or even knows, because this thing has morphed so quickly. And I don't know. And then COVID came along. I feel like COVID really changed a lot of things, which is very cliche to say now, but I think when you introduce COVID into the mix and the burnout from that, with the mutation that the academic medical centers are already undergoing, I don't have a guess anymore for what it's going to look like in 10 years. I don't know. I don't know how this is
Yeah.
going to play out.
Well, and what's you know, we should kind of just say explicitly that I think this was trying to be practical, but the reality is the data shows that people get 1 to 2 offers, right? Isn't that the
Right.
point that all the sock puppets
Oh, the side the sock puppet.
yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah,
But
yeah,
so if you're facing one offer, like you can't, like you take it, right? Like, so you
right.
can't, like, you should think about these things, and I guess keep looking if you don't like what you have. But I think the thing that I don't understand is what I haven't seen anyone that's innovative enough to embrace it. And why can't you have a revenue generation track? I mean, sure, like, I actually go ahead, call it that. That would be
Yeah,
that would be
just call a spade a spade. That'd be great if we could finally just like be honest about what's happening. Like
I mean, obviously they would not call it that. The
they should.
happiness track.
The happiness track. Yeah,
And
yeah.
then have like a research track. And like there are research tracks, right? We have, like, I mean, WashU has this model,
Yeah, Yale
but
has
it's
a version of that, but it's not as explicit. Yeah.
well, but it's like, again, it's like only viewing research as the very traditional, like, translation bench to bedside thing, right? Not like you're a trialist or you do just, like, I mean, like outreach research, that kind of stuff. Like, but have different contracts, right? Like where like if you are someone who's carrying 30 patients, pay them like they're carrying 30 patients. And I realize that, like, that's asking a lot, I guess, but I feel like if someone did that, it might be an innovative way to solve this issue, maybe. But it would require, like, hospitals would have to just pay more for certain doctors.
And that's
So
yeah, I just don't know. Maybe jobs like that exist out there because I think there's very kind of distinct regions and cultures and like the jobs and things that are available in the Northeast are different than the Midwest and the
yeah,
Southeast and those sorts
my,
of things. So
yeah, my
I don't
sense
know.
is, I view it like, say, like, the mothership is like the sun.
Yeah,
And as the planets get, like, closer functionally, like, you maybe don't have that. But my sense is there are academic affiliates that are maybe sometimes ones that are like in name only, like those probably are more like a revenue generation track in a way.
oh, absolutely, yeah,
Yeah. So like that's and so maybe that's the model. I agree with you. I have no idea what it's going to look like. I think again, this is like such a strong reason to, like, help graduates by reducing the number of residents. And, like, because if you only get 1 or 2 offers, like, you just have to take what you get. And if
you have to right, and then hope something else because I think you're a great example of that where the power comes from the ability to walk away or not being
yeah,
in need, and so a new grad is kind of you got loans that are due, you got bills to pay, and you are gonna be unemployed at the end of your PGY 5 year. Like we dress it up and call it graduation, but you're getting a diploma for being unemployed, and
no, well,
so
well, and like, look, you know what? I'll call it out because I've done it publicly before. The clinician, or what do they call it? An what is it? An investigator? No. What's the instructor, right?
instructor, yeah,
Clinical instructor.
yeah,
That shit, like, so there's a famous West Coast institution that has famously offered this
hmm
for a while, and it's basically like it's almost like an audition, right? It's like an
yeah,
internship. Like, you get paid more than a resident, but, like, shockingly low for an attending. And you are working like an attending, and then you have to, like, do that for a little bit of time, and then you become a junior attending. and
yep.
and people take it every time because it's a desirable place. And it's just, I feel like if our field gets really, really weak, we're going to start seeing more of that, and that just makes me, like, super sad because it's just like abuse,
Well,
you
and
know? I
that's
mean,
because I just remember I'm closer to it than you are. I still kind of really remember that feeling of desperation of just knowing like at the end of my PGI 5 year, my contract with my residency institution was over, and I needed an attending job. And so you're really kind of and again, I don't think it's intentional, but it's kind of really unintentionally predatory. And then those sorts of instructor positions or fellowships or whatnot, they unintentionally, or maybe there are some places intentionally, but mostly unintentionally, take advantage of that, where there's a panic of you need a job. And so I would do, I guess, in a practical sense, it does, you do have to be a little bit careful when you're a new grad in terms of how aggressive you want to question these potential employers. Whereas like you and me, if you're kind of in a stable job looking to just look, it really opens you up to
Yeah.
being not in charge, but like have a lot more freedom and to do those things. Where, so if this Colorado opportunity fell through for you, the worst case scenario is you're still have your job. Like, whereas
Yeah.
if a resident, torches some bridge because they were too aggressive asking an institution about a job, then they don't have a job. Like,
No, and what's totally true is more than anything, I'm a very practical person. And I tell the residents, like, you got to, like, the first step is identifying your priorities. And we should be very clear that, like, the person that takes that job is not bad, right? And they're not
oh yeah,
inherently making a bad decision, because if
right.
they take the job, there's a reason, right? Like, I mean, I hope it's not because it was the only offer, but
Right.
it could be because their family's there or they love the area. I mean, sometimes, like, it's the price to pay for what you want. So everyone has their priorities, but my concern is that, like, again, maybe this is a cynical view, but, like, one guy starts taking it and it fills every year. And then, like, the next institution's like, hey, that's kind of interesting. Like, we can get 2 attendings for the price of 1. And they start offering. And then next thing we know, that's like a common thing. And,
Right.
it is abusive, because the fact is, no matter what, like, 2 people can graduate and one person can make 3 times the other, or many people, maybe the median is 3 times the other. And that there's no other way to describe it than abuse, right? I mean,
Right,
that's,
right. And
yeah.
I personally know, and I'm sure you do as well, of like the distribution of salaries. And I know that exists in real life among people I personally know. And so it's just, I do think that's a very good point, and I talk about this with patients in the cancer space as well, of like process regret, or people who think that they caused their cancer or whatnot. And if you find yourself in one of those instructor positions, it's not a reflection on you or at all. Because
No.
my favorite thing is the saying of an institution cannot love you back. And that's what gets lost a lot in these conversations, is that there's you and me as Matt and Jason as human beings, and we have families and people who depend on us and love us, and people we have to take care of, and we have to make decisions. And then there's institutions and the jobs that institutions can or cannot offer, and cold RVUs and those sorts of things, which we have no control over. And walking that line of the person, the person who is the physician, who is practicing that job, who's taking care of other people who we or call patients, and then the institution who is kind of the puppet master, as it were. But it's an institution is not a living, breathing thing, and it's just it's a hard distinction to make, and people get really
Yeah.
defensive, and a lot of things are wrapped up in that. But don't ever forget that you're a person.
Right. No, that's why. Right. I mean, I think, like, I would fully encourage a person who has their first priority to be in a certain locale or with their partner, whatever, like that, you got to do what's best. And if it happens, it so happens that you have to take a job that has a really low salary. That's just what it is. My hope would be that, like, no one ever has to do that, because everyone has enough respect for the field and the positions that, that you're paid like what it's worth. We can
Yeah.
have lots of podcasts about what it should be worth, but you can just look at what people make, and that's what it's worth, right? So, like, it's out there. and
Yeah.
and like we just talked about, what is it called, the what is it, the MGMA, right?
The MGMD. Yeah, that one is actually a little tricky to get for free.
But the
But it
point
is
is,
out
like,
there. It is out there.
you can get, like, data about the annual salary of a radiation oncologist in the US,
Yeah.
right? And so, like, the hope is that, like, everyone has access to a fair salary when you're, like, doing the same thing. If you're, like, doing RVUs for an institution, whatever it is, and that's your job, like, you should be making the same as the person that's doing the same thing as you, in my opinion.
Yeah,
With regional variation that happens with every job, that kind of crap, so yeah.
and I completely, I think then the real take home from all this is if you center yourself in what is the mechanism of you getting paid, then
Yeah.
everything else from there, so that the technology, the support staff, the targets, the guarantees, the at risks, all those things, then the number itself is well, the number may be shiny and good, or not as shiny and not as good. it's less important than how that number is derived and your ability to hit it or not hit it. And
it's not the money unless it is.
It's not the money unless it is. Thanks for listening to this episode of Out of the Basement. You can claim CME for this and any other episode by following the link in the show notes. You can find me on Twitter with @DrBekta or visit www.bektamd.com. If you like this content, please let us know by rating and following us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If there's any topic you want to hear covered, or if you want to come on and talk about something yourself, reach out and let us know, and we will make it happen. Otherwise, talk to you next time.